This video will teach you how to change your vehicle's brake pads and rotors. My previous brake pads were fortunate enough to last 160,000 miles, and they were the original ones that came with the car. However, nothing lasts forever, so it's time for me to change them as well. Let's look at what we need to do this job. You will need a jack to lift up your car. Oftentimes you can just use one that comes with your car, but if you want a more high quality one, you can get one from your local retail store, home improvement store, or auto parts store from anywhere between $10 to $100 plus, depending on the quality. You'll need a breaker bar to get your bolts undone. You'll need a socket set. If you don't have any of these lying around, you can get some from your local home improvement store or auto parts store for anywhere between $5 and $100, depending on how many you buy and the quality. You will need a brake pad spreader. You can get these from your local auto parts store for between $5 and $40, depending on the quality. You can also even use a C-clamp if you want to go cheap. Also, if you would like, you can use an impact wrench in replacement to your breaker bar to speed things up a little bit. You can get one of these from your local auto parts store for around $100 for a good one, and you can use it forever, which is great. If you drive your car in the north, chances are that your brake rotors will be rusted on, so you'll need some WD-40 to get that loose when you take it off. If you don't already have this laying around, you can get some from Walmart or your local auto parts store for about $5 or less. I also suggest getting some brake clean. This will be used to clean off your brake rotors, since when they come from the factory, they'll have a coating on them that you'll want to wipe off to ensure that you have the best performance for your brakes. Additionally, you'll want to get some brake grease. If you don't already have some lying around, you can get some from your local auto parts store for about $1. Of course, you'll also have to get your brake pads and rotors. Be sure to get the exact rotor and brake pad that fits your car. I have these from Napa that are actually built by a Korean company that's OEM quality. Another company that's good is another company called Akebono, which is a good brake pad company as well. Before jacking your car up, be sure to loosen all the lug nuts on one of your tires. After the bolts are loosened, jack the car up. Now that the car is jacked up, take the wheel off. After the wheel's off, put the wheel under the car. Safety is #1 priority. Now that the wheel's off, turn the steering wheel in the direction of the wheel you took off. This will help get better access to the bolts. I took the left wheel off, so let's turn the wheel all the way to the left. Now that we have the tire off, we can see the brake pads underneath here and the rotors right here that we will be taking off. First thing we need to do is take off the caliper. There are 2 bolts back here that we can take off. Now that those bolts are off, this caliper should just slide right off. Now this caliper is attached to the brake line right up there, so you'll want to set the caliper up here, or you can use a bungee cord to have it hang. But you don't want this to just hang just freely, or you could do damage to your brake line. Now that we have the caliper off, we can see that the rotor has gotten completely rusted away up here, which means it's probably time to change that. Also, we see this inner brake pad right here. It's down to about 1 to 2 millimeters of thickness, which means it's also good to change that as well. Now that I took the brake pads off, I just slid them right off from here and here. There are 2 more bolts right here that we will need to take off as well using our socket set to take off this bracket that holds in this rotor. Unfortunately, I couldn't use my torque wrench on the top one here, so I had to do it using a different wrench, but eventually it comes right out. After that bolt is off, the bracket just comes right out. Set that aside. Before doing anything to the old brake rotor, I'd like to just take our new brake rotor and just setting it on here just to make sure that it fits just right before we do anything to the old one. As you see here, it's a perfect fit. Most likely your brake rotor is going to be fused to the frame. You can just try and shake it and see if it comes off. It should come off, but if it doesn't, take your WD-40 and just spray inside here. This will help for the stuff coming off. After the WD-40 is set for a few minutes, just take a hammer and just hit your brake rotor until it comes loose. Now please realize that this will damage your brake rotor, so you won't want to use your rotor again. However, we are replacing it, so it's not a big deal. There, it's loose. Take a new brake rotor, put it on right where the old one came off at. After the new rotor is fitted on, take your bracket, put it back on, and then these bolts in the back, start screwing those back in. Oftentimes your brake pads will come with its own hardware pieces to replace the ones that came originally on your car. Replace these at this time. The old hardware pieces should just snap out, and then you can put a new one right in its place. It should be the exact same piece. There, just like that. In just a couple minutes, you should have all 4 pieces of new hardware installed. The old ones you can just throw away. The new hardware will make it a lot easier for the new brake pads to slide in. Here we can compare the new brake pad on top to the old brake pad on the bottom. You can see it was a good time to change it. Also, you can tell on the old one that there's starting to be metal scrapings up on the bottom here and up here on the top, on the outside of the rim. That means that the rotor was getting worn so badly that this brake pad was not wearing evenly. So that's a really good indicator that it's a good time to change these. They only had about a couple thousand miles left anyway. Next up, what you're going to want to do is take your brake grease, take just a pea-sized portion out, and you're going to want to apply it to the ear of your brake pad right here. That will, one, make these easier to work when they slide inside and out in the brake operation. Also, it's going to stop squealing when that happens. You want to apply it on this particular brake pad on the farthest point, so that'll be right here, and then the same on the other side. So on this brake pad, I got the grease applied right on the top ear there and on the bottom ear here. Very important, do not get any grease on the pad or on this part of the rotor. That would be bad news. After you're done with your first brake pad, just slide it right in here, as so, right between the 2 hardware pieces. It should be snug, but not ultra tight fit. And then you'll want to do the same on the second one back here. Now, after putting brake grease on the ears of the other brake pad, I just slid it in back here. Now I have both brake pads right here. Now the next step we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get this caliper back on. At this point, you have to realize that your brake system is connected to your brake fluid reservoir underneath the hood. And in a couple steps, we are going to be basically backfilling some of that fluid back into our reservoir. So to make sure we don't have any pressure issues, we're going to open the reservoir while we do the next couple steps. So step 1, since we're going under the hood, pop that hood. Now that underneath our hood, we're going to locate our brake fluid reservoir, and we're just going to open it for a very small amount of time because we don't want our brake fluid to absorb as much water as we need. Do you remember that time earlier when we took our caliper and we set it up here? We're going to take our caliper now and we need to reset our brake piston. So that's going to be this part right here. It needs to be pushed all the way back in to accommodate our new brake pads. So what you'll want to do is take your brake pad separator, take an old brake pad, put it on top of your piston, take your separator, hook it up like this so that it's going to be pushing in the brake pad inward. And then we're just going to activate it to push the piston inward. And as the piston gets pushed inward, our brake fluid is going to be pushed back into the reservoir, which is why we opened it earlier. We're going to continue pushing this until it is flush with the caliper. And it is right now. After we have pushed back in our brake piston, we can take our caliper and put it back over our rotor, and then we'll take these bolts that hook the caliper into the brake assembly, and we'll just screw these back in.
$50 rent for you using this. I'm just kidding.
And see, sometimes when you're doing your brake job, sometimes you make friends. Now that we have the piston pushed back in, let's put the cover on this right away. That way we don't have any of our brake fluid, since it's hygroscopic, absorbing any of the water vapor in the air. Very important. And then shut the hood. Now it's time to put the tire back on. So first thing we need to do is make the wheel straight again, since we turned it to the left earlier. Now that we have the wheel straightened out, let's just put the tire back on and put all the lug nuts back on. And once the wheel is back on with the lug nuts fastened, bring the car down. Whenever you change your brakes, you always change your brakes by axle. So once you have this tire back on, bring your jack to the other side and then do the other tire. After you are done changing your entire axle of brake pads and rotors, you'll need to repressurize your system. If I press my brake pad right now, it'll be very squishy. It'll go all down to the floor. Just press it about 50 times and you'll tell that the pressure will start building back up. This will be the pistons pushing against the new brake pads after we have previously pushed them in. Do this about 50 times and then you should be good. After you have repressurized your system, I always recommend taking your car on just a slow but nimble test drive where you go down the highway, go at different speeds and just test your braking a little bit. Try not to be too hard on them, but you should take a couple panic stops on your test. The simple way I would do this is to go on the highway, go 70 miles an hour, do a slow stop down to 40 miles an hour, where it takes about 15 seconds to do so, and then do later on a panic stop where you push really hard. This should be a good way to brake in your brakes, so that'll be good going forward. And that is how you change your brakes. I hope you learned something.